Today's presenter is their Senior Vice President of Operations. In this role, he's responsible for manufacturing, supply chain, planning, and distribution for the Fender portfolio of products. Previous to this, he held roles at AB&B, the world's largest builder of electricity grids, and the Harley-Davidson Company, another iconic American brand. He spent 15 years in the Marine Corps, which means he's still a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Please welcome to the stage, Ed Magee, Fender Musical Instruments.
So, all right, are we on? There we go. Well, thanks. Interestingly, at lunch today, I got a call from one of our master builders, and the Rolling Stones, we're actually working with the Stones too, so you can add that to the list of great folks who play Fender products. We're getting them some guitars a little later on in the week. Well, thanks for this opportunity. Again, Ed Magee, Senior Vice President of Operations. I want to spend a little time today talking about transformation and really people. Manufacturers or manufacturing is really a people business. Factories are people businesses. And when you talk about transformation, we'll get in that a little later on in the presentation. Engagement with our workforce and that real connection is really what helps to drive profitability. And we'll talk about that as we get into this. So what is Fender? We make guitars, obviously, established in 1946 by Leo Fender. Our headquarters is actually in Hollywood, California right now. We've got manufacturing facilities in Corona, California, Ensenada, Mexico, and then contract manufacturers in Asia. We established Fender Digital in 2015, so like all mature companies, you've got to connect to that next generation of customer. Fender Play, learning how to play guitar, a bunch of new apps and different ways to connect digitally to our customers so that we can really build a foundation for our next generation. We've got about, actually we just broached 100,000 users of Fender Play. So in about a year and a half, we're also the largest guitar instruction company in the world. And we've got about 90% of any given concert, you're gonna see a Fender guitar or bass on stage. So in terms of the vision of the company, this is an interesting story. Leo Fender's wife, Phyllis, is actually still alive, and she actually shared this story with our CEO, Andy Mooney, a couple years ago, and she said that Fender, in one of his more reflective moments, Leo, said that he thought that artists were angels and it was his job to give them wings to fly. All right, how cool is that? How exciting a vision to wake up every day knowing that you are supporting artists who do this incredible, absolutely incredible work. As Andy took over the company about 4 years ago, he really also focused on a new mission, and that's serving players at every stage. And interestingly, for a long time, we were very much focused on artists, but again, we're over 70 years old. If you want to really be that 100-year-old, 150-year-old company, you've got to connect to that next generation of customers, and we spend a lot of time doing that with some of our new digital products. One of the other secrets to the company and its longevity was Leo listened, and lots of stories about this in the company, but Leo Fender was actually a saxophone player. Right? He was an electronics tinkerer, right? He wasn't a guitar player. The idea for the Telecaster, the first Fender product, actually came from his conversations with artists. Because what was happening at the time was, if you think back to the 50s, folks were playing acoustic guitars, right? They were playing the acoustic stand-up bass, and all the bass and guitar players would complain because the drummer was always too loud, right? So you needed to amplify the bass and the guitar, and that's essentially what he did. And he did it by listening to artists. So that really comes into play in the ethos of the company and the way that we develop new products. And certainly when we talk about manufacturing and the ability to listen to our employees. The other interesting fact coming from Harley-Davidson, right? You work with metal all the time. Metal is an interesting medium, but wood is a very, very interesting medium to work with. And wood always wants to go back to being a tree, right? And if you don't respect wood, if you don't pay attention to the actual manufacturing medium, you've really, really got to respect the wood. The wood will come back and bite you very, very quickly. So interestingly, from a manufacturing standpoint, the nature of the product is very intimate, right? Artists hold the guitar very close to the body, but also the medium that we're working with requires that we are artisans, but also focus on great manufacturing techniques and technologies. The big key is The guitar it's an instrument, right? It's not just an object, and both of those things come into play as we talk about our manufacturing processes. Here's a quick view of the hands of Fender. So one of the interesting things, if you come and visit the factory in Corona, California, there are a lot of hands that actually touch the instrument through the manufacturing process. And again, it's part of the craftsmanship and luthier nature of the product, but also, I mean, it's a very, very intimate product, and it's part of the craftsmanship that really drives our connection to artists. So when I came to Fender almost 3 years ago, one of the big challenges was we were in the midst of growth, right? And in one of the earlier interviews, we talked about, great companies really have to think through the business cycle, right? So, when I was at Harley, we were in a downturn. A lot of lessons in the downturn that you have to remember when you start growing. There are a ton of lessons as you start growing that you have to remember when your business goes through the down cycle. And one of the early challenges, in my conversations with our head of talent and our CEO was, how do we create sustainable change in the business, right? How do we drive sustainable changes that make sure that our workforce, that our manufacturing facilities are really ready for the growth and also any changes in the business environment? And this is a quote from one of the classes that we teach. We borrowed it from Harvard Business Review. It talks about the ability to learn, and our chief talent officer added, and change. The ability to learn and change are the only remaining sustainable advantages. And I think that's a really, really important statement as we get into this story. Who all here is a Six Sigma? Anybody? Six Sigma, green belts, black belts? Yeah, a few in the manufacturing audience. First question that you ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? And certainly for me, as I joined the company and learned to work with wood and paint, the two interesting problems in guitar manufacturing, we had to really think about what problem were we trying to solve with our manufacturing facilities. And much of it had to do with the idea of creating sustainable change. So let's talk about that a little bit. One of the challenges in CI is everyone tends to be focused on solving the problem. And I explain to my folks, it's like pushing a ball uphill, right? But when you push a ball uphill, what does gravity want to do with that ball? It wants to push it right back down, right? So as leaders, we've got to think through the idea that it's not just enough to actually make the change happen. We've really got to think about the things that prevent the ball from rolling back downhill. What are some of those things? Things like process characterization, standard work, audits, right? Leaders have to be engaged in processes to make sure that when we create those fixes, that ball doesn't just automatically roll downhill. The challenge and the beauty of the drawing is, as you roll the ball uphill, does it get easier or harder, right? It gets tougher, right? You've got gravity working against you. That ball always wants to roll back downhill. The culture of the factory always wants to roll back downhill. And as leaders, if we're going to create sustainable change, we've really got to think about the strength of all of the rest of those things that prevent that ball from rolling downhill. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So again, challenge as I walked in, and we used this model during my period at Harley, and the challenge was we want to build sustainable change. So how does that typically work? This is a model that we actually use to walk through that process. Basically, any system will have inputs and outputs. Businesses create a strategy. They're really good at designing work, especially engineering companies, right? We buy materials, we buy we deploy CapEx, we hire people, we define the work. Then we create a structure for it, sprinkle a few vice presidents on the organization, and everything works perfectly, right? Is that the way that it works? Not so much. In order to create a sustainable system, you've really got to understand the capabilities of your people and workforce, right? What is their training level? What is their ability to solve problems? And then there's that big culture piece. And when we start talking about culture, again, culture is one of those bricks that prevents the ball from rolling downhill or pushes it downhill faster. And organizations that actually think through all elements of all four of those areas really start to have a chance of defining some level of sustainable change. And what probably the most interesting is people. And I was asking a question at a summit in the Inland Empire Manufacturers Association. What's the most important thing that we can do as manufacturers? It's continuing to train our people. And organizations that train while you're growing, grow faster. Organizations that train when you go downwards in that business cycle actually recover about 70% faster. So the idea that we continue to train our employees regardless of the business cycle is absolutely critical because that investment is also a critical part of building sustainable change. The culture piece is the next interesting egg to crack, and we're going to spend a little time talking about that. The beauty of working at a Fender or Harley Davidson really has been the ability to tap into employee pride. And when we start talking about culture, it's an interesting just experience watching an artist walk through the factory, right? So one of our factory in Ensenada, Mexico, a very, very famous Latin band, they played at their break yesterday. And it was amazing seeing all the employees come out of the factory. They were taking videos. I mean, there was a lot of excitement about seeing artists actually using the products that we make every day. And I think regardless of what you manufacture, employee pride is probably one of the most powerful tools that leaders can tap into and most importantly, have to earn and sustain in order to really drive culture change. I love this picture. This is our plant manager, Sal Montes. One of the things that we do is the piece of the factory or the process area that has the best results in a given month. We'll go and we'll give away guitars, right? And the first time we did this, it was super interesting. What the team did was they put on a bunch of crazy, silly hats, made a bunch of noisemakers. They walked around the entire factory making noise. And everybody's like, what the hell is going on here, right? And then they stopped at an area and then recognized the team for the fact that they had the best results in safety, quality, cost, and delivery. All the standard processes. And then we raffled off 4 guitars, right? And it was interesting watching some of our employees who had worked at the factory for almost 20 years but didn't have a guitar. So watching the excitement, the joy, I mean, just the power of that connection and rewarding our employees for the incredible work that they do was really, really phenomenal. And when you tap into that pride, watch out. Again, big driver of sustainable change and culture is the ability for organizations and leaders to tap into that workforce pride. Another interesting challenge is who's got a really nice area for visitors when they come and visit your factory? Who's got a very nice area for visitors? Like your entrance, very nice. So in that same factory, what does your employee entrance look like? All right? So I pose that question to all of my plant managers as we do my first walk in the factory. And typically what I do is I'll grab the plant manager and we'll walk out into the parking lot. And I can't tell you how many times I've had factories where the parking lot was full of potholes. I mean, literally they would swallow me up if I tried to walk across the parking lot. And what I convey to my plant manager is, what are you communicating to your employees from the first minute that they come onto the property? If they're dodging potholes at 4 in the morning, right? What type of mind are they going to be in a world-class mindset as they really enter the facility? Interestingly, at Fender, one of my first visits to the factory, I showed up about 4:45. Plant starts at 5, and all the cars were driving past this big open parking area and going to the back of the factory. And I was like, all right, that's unusual. So I, popped in the shop and asked, why are people parking in the front? And the answer was, it's all reserved for salaried employees. And one of my old mentors told me, hey, never make a vice president decision in your first 6 months, right? And it took me about 2 days ago. You know what? I'm completely uncomfortable with that. We can't have our employees, the first thing that we communicate to them is they drive past a big empty parking lot to go park in the back of the facility, right? We're not, we're saying they're valuable, but the first thing that we communicate is that they are not. So we changed that policy, and again, it was a very interesting conversation with the salaried folks because they were like, well, what happens if it rains? And my response was, well, you just throw the umbrella up and you walk into the factory there, folks, sorry, you know. Or you can show up at 4:45, there's plenty of parking then, right? The next big place that we actually take a look at is the employee entrance, right? And again, in a lot of factories that I've run initially, and we always change this, but we really think about not making the employee entrance look like a high school cafeteria or walking the Green Mile, right? Most often it's boring, you know, security's at the front, there's no culture, and we made a very nice investment in both of our factories so that as employees walk in, we start to tap into that pride, right? We start to connect them to the brand, we start to connect them to our history, and again, it creates a different mindset when that employee actually hits the assembly floor. But I would challenge each of you to really think about how are you treating your employees from the second that they hit the parking lot, right? From the second they hit the parking lot. Are you communicating world-class only when they arrive at their workstation? Or are you communicating at every step that they take until the time that they do hit their workstation? Think about it. All right, so real quick video of what's going on in the factory today, and then we'll jump into some of the lessons.
Leo Fender said artists are angels and that his job was to give them wings. Every day, Fender employees arrive at the Dream Factory in Corona, California to fulfill Leo's mission. Their passion and commitment have touched the lives of millions of people around the world for over 70 years.
The most rewarding thing I would say about working at Fender would be being a part of rock and roll history, contributing my small part, you know, making sure that the tool for the rock star is ready to go.
The fact we're not just making some random chair or table, it's something to take and really pour their soul into to make art with it. Like being a musician myself, I know that every one of these guitars are going to be something that somebody uses to create art and something that somebody else is going to like hold on to and take as part of themselves. So to me, that makes it all worthwhile.
Hundreds of skilled hands infuse soul, excellence, innovation, and craftsmanship into every instrument we make. These hands help artists tell their stories, creating a lifetime of memories for people like you and me.
Passion, commitment, and fun, right? And passion and commitment comes directly with the manufacturing, right? I mean, we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing the first time. So we do a product every day that is going to be impacting the customers and lives, but at the same time, we're committed to do it, but we want to have fun to work with.
Our passion, enthusiasm, and energy has transformed music worldwide in nearly every genre and every continent. A cultural icon, Fender is woven into the daily fabric of our everyday lives in obvious and not so obvious ways.
Quality culture needs to be embraced in the manufacturing environment in order to make sure that every employee, they do not receive defects, they do not create defects, and they do not pass defects. Making sure that processes are robust, but at the same time, our employees understand that they are the owners of the quality of the product.
Them supporting us in the shop floor, asking for our opinions, our feedback, it's great because end of the day, we want to know what our customers think, what we have to improve on, and we're here as a team. We're here to help.
They're giving us more vision and more like insight into what they're doing, which helps a lot. When you tell us this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, it helps so much as opposed to before where we were just kind of in the dark. So Fender's gotten really good at communicating, which is awesome, which is huge for anybody on the floor. We want to know what's going on, and that helps a lot, I would say.
I think the main asset for Fender is our employees, right? Our product is being done with our hands. There's a lot of processes that we do it manually. And that's something that is well recognized in the industry. So we need to be with them in order to understand what they are their needs, walk the talk pretty much. If we have a direction, right, for them, we leave that direction with them on a day-to-day basis.
At Fender, we don't just make guitars. We fuel the pursuit of musical expression. In that collaborative space, we make history, we change lives, we inspire greatness.
That's our goal, is to be the best ones. Even though we're not the best ones, we just want to be better.
Legacy and passion
excelencia, prestigio,
Devotion, commitment, and engagement.
Rock and roll history, first thing that comes to mind. That's what comes to mind when I hear Fender. Rock and roll history.
We are Fender.
All right, so again, when you tap into that employee pride, good things happen. One of the other interesting things, again, it's the mindset of the leadership team, which is always the more difficult challenge when you go through transformation. One of the models that I borrowed from the Harley days and really implemented in throughout the factories is the idea of who adds value in the factory, right? So more often than not, folks think, in the traditional manufacturing sense, plant managers kind of at the top of the food chain there, stuff kind of trickles downhill, right? But who truly transforms material into a product and creates value for our customers? It's our employees. So the big leadership challenge is really the servant leadership model, right? Our focus should be removing barriers from that operator, the rotation group, the team leader, as engineers, as supervisors, and even as the plant manager or the VP of operations. My objective should be removing obstacles from our floor leadership so that they can get the job done, tapping into that pride and really driving organizational excellence. How do we go about doing that? Again, oftentimes folks want to jump right into the accountability phase, but what you've got to do is take the time with your employees to communicate, to educate, and hold them accountable, right? Communicate, educate, hold them accountable. Over and over and over again, when you do those things, you start to prevent that ball from rolling back downhill. And this leadership model is one that has served me well, certainly at Fender, at Harley-Davidson, and during my tenure in the Marine Corps. The next big challenge as we take our leaders through these interesting times and transformations is, oftentimes the leadership team will ask the question, what do I need to do every day as I come into the factory, right? We borrowed this model from our industrial psychologists back in the day, and it's a really powerful model around change. And it says that change occurs when pressure times vision times current reality times a transition plan all overcome resistance to change, all right? Pressure comes in a bunch of different forms. Leaders can create pressure, right? Metrics create pressure. The market can create pressure. But if you don't have pressure, right? If P is equal to 0, you don't get change. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. A culture wants to come back to its resting place. Leaders have to apply pressure. Oftentimes, if the market is applying that pressure, organizations don't survive, right? If you're not paying attention to the market can provide pressure by your customers leaving you, right? And when that happens, it makes it really, really difficult to recover. You've got to articulate a vision, and you as a leader have to understand current reality. And current reality happens out on the factory floor, right? Leaders have to get out of their office. They've got to, get off of the chair, walk the factory floor, and engage the employees one-on-one. One of the big stories, or one of the big lessons that we teach in some of our leader development classes is the idea of three-way communication. So one-way communication is what I'm doing right now, right? I'm talking to you, I'm conveying a message, you're gonna walk away with about 20% of what I tell you, all right? Two-way communication happens when we actually talk to each other, right? I engage in active listening. I square up, I engage you as a person, I start listening. That's where you start to create trust, right? I respect you as an employee. It's the foundation of trust when we talk and listen. Three-way communication for a leader occurs when you actually get back to the employee and respond to that question, right? And as leaders, the more that we practice three-way communication, get out on the floor, engage our employees on where they are today, that really drives that people connection that creates trust. When organizations have trust, you get the great ideas from the employees, right? You tap into that pride. All those things start working together. And this is like the GPS formula, right? So a GPS is an effective tool because you tap in where you want to go, the vision, but a GPS knows where it is today. And a good leader knows where the organization is today by engaging the employees in those two- and three-way conversations. And then finally, you need a transition plan, no change. So as a leader, what I engage all of my folks to do is more stuff on the top overcomes the natural resistance to change that always occurs as organizations go through transformation. Next big challenge, right? So you think about what problem I'm trying to solve. I walk into the factory and say, hey, factory, you guys need to change. What do our employees hear? Inevitably, when we say you need to change, they hear us blaming them for the circumstances that they're in. So one of the other interesting lessons is you always want to really focus on, our customers need a change. Our customers are driving the business in a different direction. And when you engage the customers as the driver of the change process, that really opens the door for engagement on the part of your workforce. The other interesting thing is leaders have to understand that there's a difference between fixing things and changing things. When you fix something, you focus on the problem, right? There's a ton of problem-solving methodologies. There's Six Sigma, Lean. There's a discrete outcome, and you can measure it. But when you fix it, you might be fixing it only once. Remember the ball rolling uphill, right? If you don't focus on the behavior, right? So I fix it once, but I've got to make sure that it stays fixed. We've got to start focusing on the behaviors of our employees to ensure that it's a sustainable change. How do we go about doing that? It's the things that leaders celebrate, all right? So what do you celebrate in your factory or organization over and over again? Because human beings are a little bit like bugs, right? So if you're out in the field in the middle of the night, lights are dark, you turn on a light, what do the bugs start to do? They start to circle around the light, right? So leaders can do the same thing by shining a light on good behavior. And even your crusty old employees, after a while, when you start recognizing the good behaviors, they're going to start drifting towards the light, right? When you acknowledge your employees, it's one of the most powerful things that you can do. I'll give you an example. Watch this magic trick. I just want to thank you for being such an incredible participant today. I mean, it was really awesome that you paid attention and you smiled, and I really enjoyed teaching this class. So what just happened? What did she start doing? She smiled, right? When we square up with our employees and engage them one-on-one and tell them that we care about them, they can't help themselves, right? So when we absolutely focus on the great behaviors, here's what happens. Everybody in the room now wants me to walk up to them and thank them for the great job that they did listening all day, right? Right? When we focus on the good behaviors, we spend 95% of our time as leaders focused on the problems, right? We've got to celebrate the bright spots, and that is what creates that sustainable change, right? You've got to understand the difference between the two. The fix focuses on compliance. Change is focusing on commitment, the hearts and minds, and again, think about the ball rolling back downhill, all right? All right, so a couple of big change lessons as we engage in the transformation and really started to drive success in the factory. Leaders must own the change. One of the big challenges as you go through transformation is oftentimes leaders will point in a direction, but they don't really understand the change that they're asking of their employees. So one of the things that we've always done is said, hey, look, if you want to change your workforce, you've got to be able to teach all the changes that are going on. So if we're going to engage in transformation or if we're going to engage in a new lean initiative, what I want is all of my leaders to be able to teach, right? And the beautiful thing about teaching is if you sit in a class, you learn it once. If you teach, how many times do you learn it? Every time you teach it, right? So the act of teaching, the act of learning does two really important things. One, it connects all of our leaders with the folks on the floor. And two, they're constantly reinforcing all the good behaviors. They're constantly reinforcing the change, and it's also demonstrating to the workforce that we as leaders understand the change that we're asking of our employees. The other big important thing I think for us is we talk about language, right? So language is really the tool that leaders use to drive and change culture. And we've got to think about what is the consistent language when we talk about leadership, right? What is the consistent language when we talk about lean? And as leaders really embrace that language and use that same language over and over and over again, then what you start to see is your workforce says, it's important to my leaders, we're going to actually start engaging in those changes in a very positive way. One of the other things that I'm super proud of at Fender, I've done it at ABB, we did it at Harley, was we created a leadership academy. And it started off as Ops Leadership Academy. We identified a few areas that we wanted. We called them the gold coins, right? So what are the gold coins in terms of careers, in terms of value as an employee that you can invest in to really to develop? And we focused on problem solving, project management, change management, leader development, and business acumen. And we started off as an ops leadership initiative, and then it turned into the Fender Leadership Academy. And we teach classes in each of those areas, and what is fantastic is you see folks from different parts of the organization, our marketing team, operations, obviously, supply chain, really engaging in dialogue in all of these areas. And what it drives is a new language, right, that is actually shared across the organization. Interestingly, Andy Mooney said Fender was one of the most siloed companies that he'd ever been at, right? He worked at he worked at Nike and Disney and a bunch of other incredible companies. But he comes to this little small company and he said it was just an incredible amount of silos. This is one of the tools that we're using to actually break down those silos, certainly with our middle management and leaders, so that we are all using that same language around problem solving. The other big thing is really around humility, and I'll make sure I leave a couple minutes for Q&A here, but the humble thing is really the thing that drives sustainability when you start turning that triangle upside down. Because as leaders, oftentimes, we're so focused on the future. When we engage our employees one-on-one, they're talking about how they're feeling today, right? And as a leader, sometimes it's hard to sit there and listen to your employees about how are they feeling today, but it is the most important conversation that you can have. Because when you engage them where they are today, you build those connections, you have a chance to take them on the journey for where you're thinking about going in terms of that vision. So the ability to humble yourself to your employees, humble yourself to that journey, humble yourself to the idea that, as a leader, I've got to wake up every day being the chief motivation officer for my organization. All those things are incredibly important, and feedback is probably one of the most wonderful gifts that our employees can give us if we take the time to listen, all right? So with that, again, our objective as a company, we're serving players at every stage. We're investing in our future. We're investing in our employees. And most importantly, as Leo did, we're taking the time to listen to the artists who play our products all over the planet. So with that, thank you very much. All right? So any questions? This is actually about a 3-hour class that we've boiled down into a quick presentation. Any question about the slides or the application or what's going on at Fender? Yes, sir.
Yeah, for the Leadership Academy, is that a formal class or curriculum people would go through, or just?
Absolutely. So what we did was we said we want, for a Leadership Academy, we didn't go outside. All the classes are actually taught by leaders at Fender. So we developed the curriculum with our OD department, and it's, our quality team teaches problem solving. The head of our former controller of the business actually teaches business acumen. Right? So it's all taught and led by the folks at Fender who actually own that piece of the organization. And that made it easy to get started. And then what we found was, as the ops team started taking the classes, HR folks were hearing, hey, all the other functional areas are wondering what's going on there, and they wanted to participate too. And quite honestly, we're in our 4th iteration of the classes. We teach it about every 6 months. And it's really focused on middle management all the way down to supervisors. But we've had our vice presidents actually go through the curriculum too, and it's been a really, really powerful tool in creating a consistent language in each of those areas. Okay? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How are the students chosen for the workforce?
Yeah. So great question. How are students chosen from the workforce? We just go through nominations. So each of the facilities nominates. We actually hand-selected our first group to go through as a pilot group to get them through to really understand what was going on. But HR actually manages the process. Each of the organizations submit, and then we have a little bit of a weeding out process, and we're running 49 folks through the program in the next iteration. Yes, sir.
I love the hands video and the artisan aspect.
Mm-hmm.
How do you train new employees, get them to that level? I mean, there's got to be some.
Yeah, so that's super interesting, and this is, and a lot of manufacturing folks are focused on temp employees, right? When unemployment's at 4%, right, your temp employees are the folks hustling for work, and it creates a challenge. What we found in a lot of our factories, there's a lot of families working there, right? So a lot of it is generational, especially the craftsman nature of some of the processes. And I've got probably a couple of families with probably close to 10 employees working in the factory at any given time. But the big key in terms of training, what we found is we just launched this new product called the American Acoustasonic. It was a completely brand new guitar. And what we did was, we said, hey, what works? You've got to take the time to train and document the training and create standard work around the training. And we did all the blocking and tackling things, but we did it with our employees. And I think that's what made the training very effective. The other piece is we pair folks up, and obviously the sanding. If you look at sanding, we talked about automation a little bit earlier, and even if we would invest in more automation than we have, I call it elegant automation. I'd want the automation to cover about 80% to get the, all of the, help out with the safety piece, but really you want the hands actually touching it. And it's amazing to stand there in the factory and watch one of the employees who's been working for 20 years actually sanding a headstock, taking out a pair of calipers, measuring, sanding the headstock, taking out the calipers, and then he touches it, tink, and then he doesn't measure it again, he puts it down, right? So 20 years of experience creates a lot of knowledge, and in our Corona factory, it's interesting watching it get passed on. There was a question right in front. Yes, ma'am.
You answered the question. I was wondering, how would you create standard work in such a craft? So you answered.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and it's a balance. And again, a lot of it just takes time, right? So what we've done is, especially for key skills in the factory, one of the other investments that we make is I've got folks who are training 100% of the time. So I create slots in the factory for key things like tune testing or some of the sanding processes, actually binding. You saw the employees doing the binding. That is probably one of the most craft critical processes. And interestingly, most of the folks in those processes are women, right? Because women have better fine motor skills. And if you go to a lot of guitar factories around the planet, in the most critical task, you'll see the women, it'll be a room full of women actually doing the task because of their fine motor skills. So what we do is we've identified key tasks in the factory, and then I always have a dedicated cadre of folks who are training at any given time. Yes, sir.
How do you get the employees to, like I've worked with Wood before, and like enough is enough, like it's time to move that product to the next stage. Like how do you manage that product flow?
Yeah, so that's an super interesting, because the big challenge when you're dealing with wood is, right, folks want to make the numbers, right? And you take a look at the wood, and if you don't treat the wood right, it will punish you and become a tree right before your eyes and start twisting and moving and all kinds of other crazy stuff. So two big lessons, and we spend a lot of time actually working with Bob Taylor and Taylor Guitars, right? They're some of the best on the planet in terms of wood husbandry. It's one of his huge passions. And it's process discipline and taking the time for the employees to understand why. I just had one of our master builders start a class on teaching, it's called dimensional lumber. He's teaching the engineers how to build a guitar. And he goes back to Leo Fender's basic principles, and dimensional lumber, for those of you who work with wood, those are the standard cuts of wood. The guitar is actually based upon dimensional lumber measurements, right? And our master builder has it's a 3-session, 3-hour class on all the way from wood to the teams, engineering teams, actually having to build a guitar, right? So two things happen. One is they have a better understanding of wood and some of the challenges with wood and the why behind it. But the best thing on the planet is having an engineer who says, all right, they can do that task in 15 minutes, take 2 hours to actually build a guitar, right? So they are learning two very, very valuable lessons in dealing with wood. You must respect the wood. You've got to cut with precision, and we've learned over and over. There's tons of experience in the factory that if you rush wood through the process, it will punish you. It will absolutely punish you. So, that's essentially it's education, and a lot of the employees understand that you've got to respect the wood as it goes to the factory. That doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, though, sometimes. So, yes, sir.
Building on that, just a technical question, not about the management side. But it looks like, except for a couple of decorative areas, you use only quarter-sawn wood. Is that true?
Yes and no. So depending on the products, if I paint it black, who cares, right? If you actually see the wood through the finish, then we typically use quarter-sawn wood. And then what's been interesting with American Acoustasonic, we're starting to use a lot more exotic woods. So we're using koa and Tasmanian blackwood and white limba. Some really interesting woods. And we're learning. We actually bought a bunch of flooring grade black limba, Tasmanian blackwood. And we didn't find out until we started actually cutting necks, and it looked like, Homer Simpson at the 5 o'clock shadow when the wood just kind of exploded as we started to cut it. It was like, ooh, that's the wrong grade of wood. So that wood always wants to become a tree. It's interesting. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for this time. I would say invest in your employees, take the time to listen, and I look forward to seeing you on your transformation journeys going forward. Thank you.